Hello, Sarah.
How are you doing?
Good. How about you?
Pretty good.
Good. We have a few minutes before we get started. I see
Okay.
Corbin, Taylor, your
Hello.
camera's on now, and Kate. So let's see. Sarah Lewis, Corbin, Taylor. So we'll get started in just a couple of minutes. I'm gonna check one more thing on my windows.
What? I'm doing class. Huh? For school. Mama. Hi, mommy.
Okay. I see Heidi. Hello, Heidi.
Hello.
And Kate, can you hear me? I see your mic is muted and okay, good deal. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen with you and we'll get started. Riley, I see you connected. Can I see you to give you your attendance? Your mic is muted, your camera is off. Riley Granger. Okay, there you are. Good deal. Okay, so if you go to the modules and you go down to the module that has the midterm exam, let me collapse these modules for right now. And below the chapter 4, chapter 6 assignments, there is the proctor midterm exam. And here are the instructions. Now, I'm not going to read all the instructions that you have. But I want to make sure you realize that this test has to be proctor. That means somebody actually has to watch you while you take the test. You have 3 proctoring options. One is to come to the WSC Testing Center. The other one is proctor you. And the third option is a third-party proctor. If you're using a third-party proctor, then you need to email me and ask me for a proctor agreement form. Now, it cannot just be your next door neighbor that is a retired teacher. It has to be somebody in an official capacity, like a school principal or the librarian in a public library or a testing center. You're not allowed any notes, but you are allowed a note card. And I want to make sure you realize that it's required to have a note card and is required to turn in a note card. In fact, if you don't turn in the note card, it's 5 points that are deducted from your grade. So 95 points is for your test grade, and the 5 points is for the note card. You're allowed to use the front and the back. And if you're not physically here, if of course it's an online class, so some of you are not near Altos, then you can send me pictures of that front and back and make sure it has your name. Also, you're allowed to use scratch paper. I use the scratch paper only to give you partial credit for answers that you get wrong. I don't touch the ones that you got right. I don't expect work for the ones you got right, but anything that you got wrong, I go back to the scratch paper and I see if I can follow up what you've done and I can give you partial credit. Sophia doesn't give you partial credit. Sometimes it's off by one rounding digit, and that may be the problem. The other thing that I want you to realize is at the very bottom it says that the test must be taken by 5 p.m. on the due date, but it opens 3 days prior to that. So let me go back. And in your module, this is proctor midterm, it says that the proctor closes on October 13. So October 13, let me look at it real quick on a calendar. October 13 is it's actually a Monday. So it closes on Monday at 5 p.m., but it's open 3 school days before that. So that means it will actually open on Thursday, October 9th, that this coming Thursday at 7 a.m. And it remains open from 7 a.m. on Thursday until 5 p.m. on October the 13th. Okay, so start making arrangements for your proctor, setting some time aside to take the test. And if you need to take it at night, that gives you the night of the 9th, the night of Friday the 10th, and actually the weekend. So there's plenty of time for you to take it because you have lots of different possibilities, different times that you have. It just happens to close at 5 p.m. on October the 13th. Now, I want the scratch paper by the next day. So if you have any scratch paper, then I need it by 8 a.m. the next day. So that means on Tuesday, October the 14th, I need your scratch paper. Otherwise, I will start reviewing it without the scratch paper. Okay, so that's the mechanics of, oh, and you're allowed 2 hours to take the test. You only have one try, but you have a practice test that you can do unlimited times. The questions are very much the same as the practice test, but the actual numbers in a problem changes. So what I wanted to concentrate on is problems that require formulas, so you have at least some of the formulas down. Now, some of the other formulas that you may need really depends on your preference. So sometimes students put more formulas than what I'm going to show you, but that's really up to you. So this would be what we're going to look at. It would be the minimum. So let me see. I see Alicia Young. Let me see. Melissa Carrillo, I see you there. And then let me see. Jessica Toll. Okay. And I think everybody else I had already seen. Okay, good deal. Okay, so now let me just share just share this document that I'm going to actually write on in here. So one of the first questions, and I don't want to do this live because if I do it on the pre-test, it doesn't show me if the answer is right or wrong. It's not like the homework. It's like an actual test. But I'm going to look at question number 1. but I'm gonna write some of the formulas that we need above in the previous page. But this is actually a frequency distribution, and in fact, it's a cumulative frequency distribution. So there are several things that you need to know here. One thing is the maximum and the minimum values are important because they will actually give you the range. So these are some of the formulas. Yes, I'm looking at question 1, and we're going to answer that, but it's for a cumulative frequency distribution. So one of the first things you need to remember is the range is the difference between the maximum entry and the minimum entry. So this was one of those problems where it could be helpful to write the data in order. And you don't have to necessarily sort it in the calculator, but it will be better if you actually write it in order. So that's one of the first things that I'm going to do. And I see, I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Okay, so I see an 8, 9. Then after that, I have a 10, 11, and I see 2 12s. And I thought I saw a 13, maybe not. So I think that the next one is 19 and 19. Then we have 20, 22, 23, 26. Oh, and I missed that 15. Okay, never mind. So I have a 15, then I have 2 19s. I had 120. And I'm going to have to do this. So the 12 I use the 15, and then I have 22. Sorry. 22. And then 26. Okay, so then I have 2 30s. And then I have a 32, 33, 34, 36, 39, and 40. I think I missed another one again. So I see the 2 30s. So it might be better if I put them into the calculator to sort them. But let me double check. Okay, so I have 8 and 9, 10, 11, 12, 12. Then I had a 15. And I have 2 19s. Then I have a 20. I know which one I miss. 22. Then I missed the 23. So then I have 23. Okay, so then after that I have 26. and 30, 30. I have 32, 33, and 34. And then again, no, 36, 39, and 40. Okay. So they're in order. So you have that your maximum is 40, your minimum is 8. So you would find your range and you would have 40 minus 8. That will give you 32. And the reason why that is important is because for the class width, you take the range divided by the number of classes. In general, in the real world, you have to determine what the number of classes is, but actually in this problem, I think they tell us that it's going to have five classes. So I know that that's going to be 32 divided by 5. Then I'm going to divide that. And this is where we sometimes forget. So you may want to write yourself a note. You always round it up. It doesn't follow the typical rules for rounding that we do in math, in algebra. If it is a 6.1, it will be round up to a 7. If it is a 6.4, it's going to round up to a 7. If it's a 6.8, it's going to round up to a 7. So you're going to have a class width of 7. So I think that's something that is not really a formula, but you may want to write yourself a note that you're going to have to actually write your or round up your class width. Now, coming back to the frequency distribution that we're forming. So now we need to apply that class width to the numbers that we have. So we start out with the minimum. So the minimum is going to become the limit of the first class. Now, if the class width is 7, it doesn't mean that to get this next, the upper boundary or the upper limit, that you're going to add a 7. No, it means that you add a 7 to get the next class limit. So that's going to be 15. 15 plus 7 will be 22. 22 plus 7 will give you 29. 29 plus 7 will give you 36. So how do you know what the upper limits are going to be? The limits, the class limits, do not overlap. So if the next class starts with a 15, this should end with a 14. The ones that overlap are the boundaries. So if this one starts on a 22, this will be a 21. And by the way, if I add a 7 to 14, I get 21. So the difference between the upper limits is also 7. 21 plus 7 will be 28. 28 plus 7 will be 35. 35 plus 7 will give me 42. And something that doesn't really, they don't ask you to do it here, is to do the tally, but that's how you decide on the frequency. So each of this entry is in only one of those classes. Now, the boundaries are the ones that overlap, and it depends. Sometimes they give you the limits, and that's how you decide your boundaries. But when you're constructing them yourself, they differ by a unit. So then the 8 is going to go down by 0.5, so that will be a 7.5. And the 14 goes up to a 14.5. So the next class, the boundary starts with a 14.5. The 21 goes to 21.5. This one goes down to a 21.5. So that's why I mean that they overlap. 28 goes up to a 28.5. The next one starts with a 28.5. 35 goes to 35.5. This one starts with 35.5. And the 42 goes up to a 42.5. And the class boundaries is what you normally use when you graph the distribution. That or the midpoints, but you don't actually use the class limits because when you're doing bar graphs, they're flush. They're one next to the other, and it's because you're going by the class boundaries. Okay, so now for the frequency, I need to do a little bit of a tally here. So I'm gonna take each of those digits and see what class it's in. So 8 is in this class. So it's 9, 10, 11, 112, another 12, but the 15 is not. The 15 is here. 19 is in this class, another 19, 20, but 22 is not. So it should be just 4 of them in that class. The 2 12s, the 15, the 2 19s, and the 20. So 22 will now be in this class. So I have 22, 23, 26, but 30 is not. So the 2 30s is in this class, 32, 33, 34, but 36 is not. And 36, 39, and 40 are in this class. So this is what we call the frequency. So the frequency will be 7 for the first class, then 4, and that should actually be a 6. So that should be a 6, 4, 3, 5, and 3. And when you add the frequency, we use that summation for the frequency. When you add the frequency, you get, let's see, that will be 18 and 3, that will be 21, which 21, 10, 18, 21. And that should be the total number of entries or the total number of data that you had in here. Now, the cumulative frequency, it's gonna be adding the frequency from the previous class. So for the first class, it's still just a 6. But for the next class, it will be 6 plus 4, that will be 10. 10 plus 3 will be 13. 13 plus 5 will be 18. 18 plus 3 will be 21. And it's not coincidence that this last place right here is actually the same as the total of the frequency. And so this is what they mean by a cumulative frequency distribution. Sometimes you have to do all this from scratch. Sometimes you actually have to graph it. Sometimes they give you some of the information for you to actually graph it. Let me go back to this page and let me just remind you that the frequency comes from the tally. The relative frequency, that's something that we didn't use in this example, but it might be in others. The relative frequency is actually the frequency divided by the total number of entries. And the cumulative frequency it's adding the frequencies, but starting with the first, the first frequency stays the same. So those are really not formulas, but there may be things that you need to remind yourself to have on your note card. Now, there was a problem that I came across that it does require a complicated frequency, complicated formula, and that is the percentiles. Let me see if I have it here. Yeah, it's number 8. I'm actually going to move that slide up. So in number 8, it's working with the percentile ranks. It says the data shown represents the winnings on a particular game show throughout the season. Find the approximate percentile rank of 225,000. If necessary, round to the nearest dollar. So it's fairly complicated, but not as complicated as when they ask you, given the percentile, what is the actual amount? So one of the first things that we need to do here is we need to find this is the reason why I took a picture of it, is because we're gonna use the frequency, the cumulative frequency. So we're gonna calculate the cumulative frequency. So for the first class, it will just be whatever the frequency is. Then you add 6 to 16, and that gives me 22. 22 plus 25 will be 47. 47 plus 47 will be 94. 94 plus 26, it's going to give you 100 and, what is that? 26, actually, hold on. I think I may have done that wrong. That's 47, 47 is 14. That looks good. Okay, so now here, this will be a 10 and 1. So that will be 120. 120 and 6 will be 126. So by the way, remember, this is your N. It will be the same as if I added all the frequencies. That will give you 126. So that's N. So the reason why we need that is because there is a formula, and I'm going to actually write down the formula here. To find that percentile rank, which is P, you need to take 100 divided by N times, and we're going to talk about what each of these parts is. That stands for the cumulative frequency plus the frequency times the actual value that you're given for the percentile minus an L. That's the class width divided by age. So let me write down here to the side. N is the total number of entries. And in this case, is that 126. Then L is the lower limit of the class that the value you're given is in. We'll talk about that. Age is the class width. P is the percentile given, or the value of the percentile given. And hold on. And then CF is the cumulative frequency. I keep doing that, sorry. The cumulative frequency of the preceding class. Okay, so let me come back here, and let's say that when you see the value of 225,000, if you look at these classes here, it looks like they're boundaries, but they're boundaries for classes. It looks like 225 is going to be in this class. So for this particular problem, your N is 126. I didn't double check adding those, but the frequency, the cumulative frequency on the last class should be the 126. The lower limit of the class that this value is in, that L is actually 216.5. The class width, remember that the class width is not the difference of the lower limit and the upper limit. It's the difference between the lower limits of each class or the upper limits of each class. So if you take 216.5 minus 199.5, that's going to turn out to be 17. And that is your class width. I'm going to write it here. Now, P is the value that you're actually given. That's the 225. That's the one that you're finding a ranking for. So P is 225. And then this is a bit strange, but the cumulative frequency for the preceding class is saying, if we know the value is in this class, I want the cumulative frequency for the previous class. So the cumulative frequency should be a 6. The CF should be a 6. So now we're going to put it into this formula. So we have P equals 100 divided by 126 times. Then I have the CF, that's the cumulative frequency for the preceding class. And that's going to be just a 6 plus, and then we have a fraction, and we have F, and I didn't identify that. I need to make sure I write it in here. F is the frequency of the class. The class that the value is actually in. So then for this particular class, the frequency was a 16. So that means that the F was 16. So now I'm going to substitute it here. So I have 16 times. In that PI, I also did not identify it exactly like that, but it's actually the value for the percentile that you're actually given. And that's the 225 minus the lower limit, and that is 216.5. All of that divided by the class width, age, and the class width was 17. And this will give us actually the percentile rank. So I'm going to put it into the calculator exactly as you see it there. Let me go ahead and clear all of this. So I'm going to use the fraction alpha y equals choice number 1. So I have 100 divided by 126. Let me double check. And then I'm going to open parentheses here. And then I have 6 plus. Then I'm going to use a fraction again, alpha y equals choice number 1. And then in that numerator, I have 16 times, or 16 parentheses 225 minus 216.5, close the parentheses, and divide it by 17.
On the beginning, you have 1126 instead of
Thank you.
126.
Thank you. I was just about to say that doesn't look right. And that will definitely not give me the right answer. So let me delete that, then press enter. And then this is saying that this value is in the 11th percentile. And it does say to round to the nearest dollar. But I think that may be referring to some of the other quantities in there, but this will be 11.1, and that will be the percentile rank for that particular value. So this is one of the hardest formulas to follow. It's the only type of question on percentiles that I actually included. There were other versions of it or other slightly different situations. So make sure you have this formula and that you practice on that particular problem quite a bit. Now I have there are other formulas in the problems that you're gonna encounter. Number 14, I didn't actually take a picture of it. Let me go here, and I think I have it open. Number 14. This is the kind of problem where it will be helpful to actually put that information into the calculator. And once you put that data, then you do one variable statistic. So I'm not going to take the time to enter the data, but you want to make yourself a note that requires that you enter the data in stat edit. And I'm gonna clear this. So you will have the data enter in here, all of those values. That's time consuming, but you will do that. Then once you enter all that data, then the range is the maximum value minus the minimum value, but you want to sort it. So remember to sort that. You go ahead and say stat sort number 2. And then you tell what list, second, and list 1. Press enter. So then when you go back to stat edit, it has ordered your data. And I just wanted to remind you of that. Now, to actually find the variance and the standard deviation, you go stat, calculate, one variable statistics. So that will be choice number 1. And we leave the frequency list blank. The list 1, that's where your values are in, calculate. And this is your standard deviation. Watch out in case they ask you for the standard deviation of a sample, so it's S, but the standard deviation of a population is sigma. And then to find the variance, it will be square. So make sure you write yourself a note that this is actually a calculator exercise. This is also how you can find your quartiles. So I could just do the range would be the 6 minus 0 for this problem. And that gives you the first quartile, which is Q1, the median, which is actually quartile 2, or second quartile, and the third quartile for that quantity. Now, number 25. requires some formulas. So let me go and look at number 25. So this has to do with a binomial distribution, and that's when you have that P is a probability of success and Q is the probability of failure. So in this case, your P will be that 0.88. And then to find the Q, you subtract the 0.88 from 1. So I want to actually write those down because a lot of times students miss this question because they forget it's not really a calculator exercise. So I'm going to write this. I'm going to open another page. So this is problem number 25. So the little p is 0.88. The probability, that's the probability of success. The probability of failure will be 1 minus p. So that will be 1 minus 0.88. And that's going to give you 0.12. So this is what I want you to remember. To find the mean of a binomial distribution, the variance of a binomial distribution and the standard deviation of a binomial distribution, it's formulas, it's not the calculator. So for mu, this is a binomial distribution. Mu is actually n times p. Then the variance is the standard deviation square, but it's n times p times q. And the standard deviation is always the square root of the variance. So it ends up being the square root of n times p times q. So for this particular problem, n, and I didn't pay attention to that, but it said a sample of 100 government employees. So that means my n is actually 100. So you're taking 100 times 0.88. So that's going to give you 88. Now you take 100 times 0.88 times 0.12, or just 88 times 0.12. And that will be 1056. And that's the variance. Now, if this had more decimal places, I recommend not to round it, because now you want to take the square root of that exactly as it is. So I go second square root, and you can go second and the negative sign to bring the answer from the previous step. And now you follow whatever instructions you're given for rounding. I think it said round your answers to 1 decimal place. So then this should have been a 10.6, but you don't want to use 10.6 to take the square root. You want to take the square root of the 10.56 before you round it, because that will give you a round of error, and then that will be 3.3. Says 3.24, so it will be 3.3. So remember to write down these formulas because it's actually a very common mistake. Now, let me see. Number 26. It also talks about a binomial distribution, but this is a calculator exercise. It says 26% of couples who plan to marry in a certain year are planning a destination wedding. So that is your probability of success. So P is a 0.26. Then it says, if a random sample of 12 couples who plan to marry, if a random sample of 20 couples who plan to marry is selected, then find the probability that fewer than 5 couples have a destination wedding. So the 12 is what we call the number of trials. We're looking for the probability that X is, it says fewer than 5 couples. So X is less than 5. But that means it could be that X is 4. It could be that X is 3. X is 2, 1, or 0. Now, to calculate each of those, like when I take P of 4, this is my X equals 4. So let's calculate this so that you remember how we're doing that. So we go to the calculator and we go to the distribution menu. So that will be second vars. But this is a binomial distribution and that was choice A. So if I go up, it will be this choice A right here. So then I go up to A. The number of trials was 12 couples in the sample. The probability of success was that 0.26. And for that particular probability, P of 4, the X value was a 4. Press enter again. And if they ask you to give your answer, the final answer round to 3 decimal places, this one is not my final answer, so I would go with at least one more. So then P of 4 will be 0.2034. And then you're going to have to calculate each of those probabilities. But as long as your probability of success and your number of trials is not changing, that's where you can actually go and grab this command, press enter, and then you can just keep editing it, editing that X that is at the end. Like if you press 3, if you override it and press 3, it will give you the probability for P of 3 and do the same for the others. So you may need to write yourself a note here that in this kind of problems is the DISTR menu, option A on the calculator. Okay, so around problem, let me see, I made a note. Around problem 30 or 31, you have also formulas for z-scores. So there are really 2 formulas that we follow for z-scores. So let me write it here. That you want to have on your card. So you have a typical z-score that takes an X minus the population mean divided by the population standard deviation. And actually, I made a note, these are problems 27 and 28. And X is a random variable, so X will represent a cholesterol level for a particular individual or the price of a car, if that's the data. X represents one particular value. Now, problem 29 through 32, you're using the tables, and the tables are provided. However, in the word problems, the tables are not provided. So if it talks about a particular X value, then you use this formula. But if it talks about, like in number 33, if it talks about the mean of a sample, the probability that the mean of a sample falls within two values or greater than one value, then you have to make these adjustments. The standard deviation for the means, it's the mean of the, is the standard deviation of the population divided by the square root of n. And that's also called the standard error. I don't think I have a problem. I didn't see a problem for the standard error. That's another interpretation of this, but in problems like 33, then they specifically ask for the probability that the mean of a sample will do this or that. So we need to make this adjustment. In the z-score, it's not about an X, but it's about the X bar. X bar minus mu divided by this new standard deviation that was adjusted. There are two other word problems where you're not given the tables. So you have to calculate your z-scores either with a formula or you have to calculate them with the calculator. So those are the problems that I thought require formulas. There may be others, for example, the quartiles around problem number 9. There are some formulas, but they're not too difficult. Then the mean is an average, knowing how to calculate the median. And then the mode is the one that repeats the most. So as you go through your practice test, you may come up with other formulas or other reminders that you're using in those problems. But in my experience, those are some of the ones that are easy to forget the difference, or easy to forget that these problems have nothing to do with the calculator, but these ones do, and they talk about binomial distributions. Then this is just a very difficult formula. You don't want to ever commit it to memory, so make sure you write it in there. And it's the only related to percentiles that we have of this kind. And then some of the formulas to remind you of the class width and how to construct those frequency distributions. Are there any specific questions? I didn't check the discussion this weekend, but I will check it and make sure I look at questions, especially as you're preparing for your test. And I am gonna have a recording of this meeting, and I'm gonna print like the actual document that I wrote on in case it helps you. But I need to make an inventory of who did not show up for the Zoom meeting, since it's required, so that they have a chance to make it up. So expect the recording soon. I will let you know, and most likely I will post it in the same module where you have the actual midterm. Below chapters 4 and 6. So expect the recording soon, like maybe even tonight. I will post it somewhere here, but the transcript, I would wait until students make it up, and I don't know, this is not actually my class. Let me see if I put in here when those makeups are due, so you know when to expect the actual written document. Let's see, Zoom meetings. They have until Wednesday at midnight. So Thursday morning, I will post it. I will post the actual document. So any questions about anything? Or too many to think about? Well, if something comes up, put it in the discussion, and I'll be glad to look at those. Okay, have a good evening. And I think I took attendance for everybody that was here, so you're all set. Have a good evening. Thank you.